Picture this. I'm sitting by my family's pristine mountain lake, watching the sunset paint the water gold while my campfire crackles like nature's own soundtrack. 4 generations of my family have fished these waters, and tonight I'm continuing a tradition that started when my great-grandfather homesteaded this land in 1889. Then the universe decided to take a giant dump on my peaceful evening. Multiple police sirens start wailing, echoing off the canyon walls like angry banshees with authority complexes. 4 county sheriff cruisers come barreling down my private road, red and blue lights flashing brighter than a casino at midnight. Deputies jump out with hands-on weapons, approaching my campsite like I'm cooking meth instead of hot dogs. Behind them rolls a pristine white Escalade. Out steps this woman clutching a clipboard like it's the Holy Grail, her face twisted with the kind of righteous fury that could restart the Civil War. This man is illegally camping on protected community wetlands on my family's lake that we've owned since before her great-grandmother was born. What would you do if police showed up while you were camping on your own property? Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Bet you've never heard a property rights story this batshit insane. Let me back up and tell you how a peaceful mountain lake that's been in my family since before automobiles were invented suddenly became the center of what can only be described as the most ridiculous property rights battle in Colorado history. My name's Fletcher Hawkins. I'm 52 years old, and I'm what you might call stubbornly traditional. I'm a retired wildlife biologist who traded government bureaucracy for the honest work of building custom furniture with my own hands. My great-grandfather Jeremiah homesteaded this 300-acre slice of Rocky Mountain paradise in 1889, back when men settled disputes with handshakes instead of lawsuits and neighbors minded their own damn business. The centerpiece of our property is a 40-acre spring-fed lake so pristine you can see trout swimming 20 feet down. Crystal clear water reflects snow-capped peaks like a mirror made by God himself, surrounded by aspen groves that shimmer gold every fall. The smooth stones along the shoreline are worn slick by countless Hawkins family hands skipping rocks and building campfires. The scent of pine needles mixed with morning mist off the lake water has been my personal alarm clock for 5 decades. Every summer of my childhood was spent here, learning to fish from my grandfather, swimming with my cousins, and listening to stories about the old days when this whole valley was nothing but ranches, wildlife, and people who understood that some things are more valuable than money. Then the world went crazy around us faster than a caffeinated squirrel in a nut factory. 5 years ago, some California developer decided our quiet mountain valley needed a luxury resort community. Alpine Vista Estates, 200 vacation homes starting at $2.8 million, complete with golf course, spa facility, and enough HOA rules to make a prison warden weep with envy. The new residents were exactly what you'd expect. Retired pharmaceutical executives, tech millionaires, and the kind of people who think roughing it means staying at a hotel without concierge service. They built mansions that looked like log cabin theme parks and complained that our working ranch didn't match their mountain lifestyle aesthetic. Enter Cordelia Blackstone, 48 years old, and the kind of woman who probably schedules her bathroom breaks and color coordinates her hiking boots with her designer outdoor wear despite never actually hiking anywhere more challenging than a paved nature trail. Cordelia had made her fortune pushing overpriced pharmaceuticals, retired early, and apparently decided that running an HOA was her divine calling. She possessed the kind of face that plastic surgery couldn't quite salvage. Too much work around the eyes, lips that looked perpetually startled, and a permanent expression suggesting she'd just detected an offensive odor but was too refined to acknowledge it publicly. Spoiler alert, she wasn't refined at all. The trouble started 6 months ago when Cordelia began what she called environmental monitoring of our lake. She'd show up with a clipboard and measuring tape, taking water samples and photographing everything from shoreline vegetation to the dock my grandfather built with hand tools in 1952. "I'm just concerned about watershed protection," she'd say with that fake smile rich people use when they're planning to screw you over for your own good. A lake this size really should have proper environmental oversight. The smell of fresh bullshit was so thick you could package it and sell it as organic fertilizer. Then came the official letters, environmental impact assessments, water quality concerns, claims that our private recreational activities were threatening the community watershed. Never mind that my family had been maintaining this lake's ecosystem longer than most environmental protection laws had existed, or that our stewardship had kept it pristine while government-managed lakes turned into algae-choked cesspools. The final straw was when she filed complaints with the EPA, State Wildlife Department, and County Environmental Office, claiming that my monthly camping trips, a tradition I'd maintained for 30 years, were damaging sensitive wetland habitat and contaminating protected water sources. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a chainsaw and serve it at Sunday dinner. While Cordelia claimed environmental concerns about my camping, her precious resort community had built a golf course that used more chemicals than a pharmaceutical factory and pumped so much water that 3 downstream ranches had their wells go dry. But apparently, environmental protection only applied to activities that weren't generating HOA fees and inflating property values for wealthy retirees. That's how I ended up in the most surreal conversation of my life with 4 armed deputies while my hot dogs burned over a campfire that had been warming Hawkins family gatherings since before Colorado was even a state. Cordelia's opening strategy was what I call death by 1,000 environmental reports, weaponizing every government agency with acronyms longer than a CVS receipt to harass me into submission. Within 2 weeks of that camping incident, I received certified letters from the EPA, Colorado Department of Wildlife, County Environmental Health, and something called the Regional Watershed Protection Authority that I'm pretty sure she invented during her afternoon yoga session. Each agency demanded immediate cessation of all recreational lake activities pending comprehensive environmental impact assessments. The bureaucratic creativity was almost impressive. My monthly camping trips were now unauthorized overnight occupancy of sensitive wetland areas. Fishing became unregulated extraction of aquatic wildlife. Even skipping rocks had transformed into mechanical disturbance of sediment layers affecting benthic ecosystem stability. Because apparently having fun was environmentally destructive, but building golf courses that used enough chemicals to stock a pharmacy was perfectly fine. Cordelia hired Pristine Environmental Consulting, a firm that specialized in finding environmental problems where none existed, like mechanics who discover expensive repairs on perfectly good cars or doctors who find rare diseases in healthy patients with good insurance. Their preliminary assessment was a masterpiece of creative writing that would make science fiction authors weep with envy. My 40-acre lake was suddenly a critical habitat corridor for endangered species that had somehow survived just fine for 130 years without government protection. The campfire ring my grandfather built with river stones was now an unauthorized combustion facility threatening regional air quality standards. The smell of manufactured outrage was stronger than the pine smoke from my supposedly illegal campfires, with a distinctive aroma that reminded me of political campaign headquarters during election season. Mini twist, my investigation revealed that Cordelia's environmental consulting firm was owned by her brother-in-law, and their scientific reports were basically environmental mad libs with scary buzzwords inserted wherever they needed to justify harassment and generate billable hours. My counterattack came in the form of Dr. Margaret Wolfe, a real environmental scientist who'd studied our lake ecosystem for her doctoral dissertation 15 years earlier. Margaret took one look at Cordelia's bogus reports and started laughing so hard I worried she might need oxygen therapy. "Fletcher, this lake is one of the most pristine mountain ecosystems I've ever studied," Margaret said, wiping tears while gasping for breath. "Your family's stewardship practices are textbook examples of private conservation done right. These reports aren't just wrong, they're scientifically impossible." Margaret's professional counter-assessment was devastating to Cordelia's environmental narrative. Water quality exceeded all federal standards by significant margins. Wildlife populations were thriving under our stewardship. The lake's ecosystem was healthier than most government-managed conservation areas that received millions in taxpayer funding. But facts were apparently optional when you had enough money to hire pseudoscientists and political connections to pressure government bureaucrats who'd rather process complaints than verify their validity. The harassment escalated to daily monitoring visits by HOA members with cameras, clipboards, and attitudes that could sour fresh milk from 3 counties away. They'd set up folding chairs at my property line and document every activity like they were conducting surveillance on an international crime syndicate instead of watching a man feed fish and maintain hiking trails. The constant click of camera shutters mixed with their whispered conversations created a soundtrack of suburban fascism that violated the natural silence my family had protected for generations. Cordelia installed motion-activated cameras on trees at the property boundary, claiming they were for wildlife monitoring while actually conducting unauthorized surveillance of my private activities. The irony of environmental activists trespassing to document alleged trespassing was apparently lost on people with advanced degrees in righteousness and zero understanding of constitutional property rights. Knowledge nugget: private property owners often have stronger environmental protections than government agencies. Document your conservation practices and water quality to establish stewardship credentials before bureaucrats attack. The county environmental department, probably exhausted by Cordelia's daily phone calls and creative interpretation of environmental law, issued a preliminary compliance order requiring me to obtain permits for any lake-related activities, permits that would cost $15,000 and take 18 months to process, assuming approval at all. The legal bills started mounting like campaign debt during a presidential election. Environmental attorneys charge more per hour than most people make in a week, and fighting government bureaucracy requires the kind of patience and financial resources that would make Job consider career changes. But the real masterpiece was when Cordelia organized Citizens for Lake Protection, a grassroots environmental group consisting entirely of Alpine Vista Estates residents who'd moved here specifically for lake views and were now demanding that I stop using my own lake because it might disturb their vacation home aesthetics. The state wildlife officer who responded to investigate Cordelia's latest complaint was Buck Sterling, a reasonable man who took one look at our pristine lake, then at the chemical-soaked golf course visible across the valley, and shook his head with the weary expression of someone who'd seen this exact environmental hypocrisy play out dozens of times. "Mr. Hawkins, this is the cleanest mountain lake I've seen in 20 years, Buck said. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it, and maybe invest in security cameras, because somebody's playing expensive games with taxpayer resources." That night, sitting by my supposedly illegal campfire while watching stars reflect in water my family had protected for 4 generations, I realized this wasn't about environmental protection. This was about control, money, and people who thought wealth gave them the right to steal other people's heritage. When environmental harassment didn't break me, Cordelia shifted to legal warfare with the precision of a pharmaceutical executive who'd spent decades destroying competitors through regulatory manipulation and patent lawsuits designed by lawyers who bill more per hour than most people make in a month. The $2.5 million environmental damage lawsuit hit my mailbox like a financial meteor, complete with expert witnesses, scientific testimony, and enough legal jargon to choke a Supreme Court justice with a doctorate in constitutional law. According to Cordelia's attorneys, my family's century of lake stewardship had somehow caused irreversible ecological damage requiring immediate financial compensation and permanent cessation of all recreational activities. The irony was so thick you could bottle it and sell it as premium stupidity at organic grocery stores in Boulder. Her legal team had assembled expert witnesses who could apparently find environmental disasters in a glass of distilled water. Dr. Reginald Pompworth, a consultant who specialized in testifying that pristine ecosystems were actually environmental catastrophes, claimed our lake showed clear evidence of anthropogenic disturbance patterns consistent with systematic habitat degradation. Translation: my family's swimming and fishing had somehow destroyed an ecosystem that was thriving better than most national parks, despite having zero scientific evidence to support claims that would make any legitimate biologist laugh until they needed medical attention. Mini twist: my attorney's investigation revealed that Dr. Pompworth had been sanctioned by 3 different courts for providing false testimony in environmental cases, and his scientific methodology involved literally making up data to support whoever paid his exorbitant consulting fees. The emergency injunction was pure legal terrorism disguised as environmental protection. One day I'm exercising constitutional property rights. The next day, I'm legally prohibited from camping, fishing, or even walking to my own shoreline without risking contempt of court charges that could land me in jail for using my own land. The financial pressure was surgical in its brutality. Environmental litigation requires expert witnesses charging $500 per hour just to read case files. My attorney retainer alone was $75,000, with additional costs for environmental consultants, water quality testing, and document production that made buying luxury cars look economical. The insurance cancellation was the cherry on top of this legal harassment Sunday. My property coverage disappeared overnight due to high-risk activities and ongoing environmental litigation. Apparently, using your own lake was now considered as dangerous as operating a nuclear waste facility or hosting motorcycle rallies for methamphetamine enthusiasts with anger management issues. The smell of legal desperation mixed with expensive attorney cologne was becoming the dominant scent around my property, replacing the natural pine and lake water fragrance that had defined this place for generations. But my counter-strategy was developing with the methodical precision of someone who'd spent 30 years studying both ecosystems and bureaucratic incompetence in government agencies that couldn't manage a lemonade stand profitably. Community support materialized faster than gossip at a church potluck. Local ranchers facing similar development pressure understood exactly what was happening. The Hill Country Property Rights Alliance contributed $25,000 to my legal defense fund within a week, recognizing that environmental lawsuits were the new weapon of choice for wealthy people who wanted to control other people's property. Knowledge nugget: environmental damage lawsuits require specific scientific evidence and documented chain of causation. Maintain detailed records of your conservation practices and regular water quality testing to defend against fraudulent claims. The Environmental Law Clinic at Colorado University provided pro bono assistance, recognizing our case had implications for private conservation efforts statewide. Law students worked nights and weekends researching precedents, energized by the opportunity to fight environmental fraud while building their resumes with meaningful legal experience. But the nuclear bomb in our legal arsenal came from Dr. Sarah Whitman, a U.S. Geological Survey wildlife biologist who'd been quietly studying our lake as part of federal research on private conservation effectiveness. Her findings were devastating to Cordelia's environmental narrative. Our lake supported rare native fish species that had disappeared from most Colorado waterways. Water quality exceeded federal standards by margins that made government-managed reservoirs look like industrial waste pools. Wildlife populations thrived at levels conservation biologists considered optimal for mountain lake ecosystems. This lake represents exactly the kind of private environmental stewardship that government agencies should be studying and replicating, Dr. Whitman testified. The harassment of this family is not just legally wrong, it's environmentally destructive. The insurance trap backfired spectacularly when my new coverage provider, a company specializing in rural property insurance, investigated Cordelia's claims and discovered a pattern of fraudulent environmental lawsuits targeting private landowners across 3 states. Their fraud investigation unit was more thorough than most criminal prosecutors and infinitely more motivated, since they didn't appreciate wealthy people weaponizing insurance systems to conduct legal harassment campaigns against property owners who pose zero actual environmental risks. That evening, sitting in my kitchen surrounded by legal documents and conservation research, listening to the gentle sound of lake water lapping against the shoreline that some judge had temporarily made illegal for me to visit, I realized we weren't just fighting for property rights anymore. We were fighting for the principle that private stewardship could outperform government management, and that constitutional rights still meant something when wealthy people tried to purchase the legal system. Cordelia had just discovered she'd picked a fight with the wrong family, the wrong cause, and the wrong mountain lake. When legal pressure failed to break me, Cordelia escalated to media warfare with a kind of professional public relations campaign that would make political spin doctors weep with admiration and used car salesmen take detailed notes on advanced manipulation techniques. She hired Mountain West Communications, a Denver-based PR firm that specialized in environmental messaging and had previously convinced entire communities that fracking was actually beneficial for endangered butterfly habitat conservation. Their first move was launching a coordinated media blitz portraying me as a wealthy landowner destroying public environmental resources for private recreational abuse. Because nothing says wealthy landowner like a retired biologist who builds furniture in his barn and camps in a sleeping bag older than most of Cordelia's Botox injections. The narrative was pure genius wrapped in environmental righteousness. Local newspapers received professionally photographed images of my industrial-scale recreational facility that somehow made my grandfather's handmade dock look like an offshore oil platform. Social media accounts with names like Colorado Lake Protection and Mountain Watershed Guardians posted daily updates about the urgent environmental crisis at my private commercial lake operation. One-man camping and fishing had apparently become a commercial operation threatening the entire Rocky Mountain ecosystem, which was impressive given that most actual commercial operations couldn't achieve that level of environmental impact if they tried. The political lobbying was surgical in its precision and expensive as campaign cocaine. Strategic donations flowed to county commissioners, state environmental regulators, and federal EPA administrators who might have jurisdiction over interstate watershed protection. Money found every crack in the political foundation like water seeking the path of least resistance and maximum corruption. Mini twist, my investigation revealed that Cordelia's PR firm was simultaneously representing 3 different development companies across Colorado, all using identical environmental messaging templates to target private landowners whose property interfered with luxury resort expansion plans. The harassment escalated beyond surveillance to active environmental sabotage. Someone had been introducing non-native fish species to my lake, then photographing them as evidence of my illegal species manipulation. The sound of splashing water at night mixed with hushed voices confirmed that environmental activists were committing actual environmental crimes to frame me for imaginary ones. The irony was so thick you could use it as insulation for energy-efficient vacation homes. My counterattack came through Peter Chen, an investigative journalist from the Denver Post, who'd been tracking environmental lawsuits targeting rural property owners and smelled a story bigger than local environmental disputes and more corrupt than state political campaigns. "Fletcher, you're case number 13 in a pattern I've been documenting," Peter explained, his laptop screen covered with charts connecting development companies, PR firms, and targeted landowners. "This is systematic environmental fraud designed to steal private property for commercial development." Peter's investigation was devastating to Cordelia's environmental narrative. His articles revealed coordinated campaigns, financial connections between development companies and environmental consulting firms, and systematic abuse of government regulatory authority for what amounted to legalized property theft with environmental camouflage. The media attention attracted genuine environmental groups horrified to discover that environmental protection laws were being weaponized against actual conservation success stories. The Colorado Wildlife Federation issued a public statement supporting our stewardship while condemning the abuse of environmental regulations for commercial development. But Cordelia wasn't finished with her environmental theater production. She organized Citizens for Responsible Lake Management, a grassroots group consisting entirely of Alpine Vista Estates residents coordinating with professional environmental activists who'd probably never seen a natural lake outside of vacation brochures and nature documentaries. Their public demonstrations were masterpieces of environmental performance art. Protesters with professionally printed signs gathered at the county courthouse demanding immediate government intervention to protect critically endangered watershed resources from my systematic environmental destruction. The smell of manufactured environmental crisis was so strong it overpowered the genuine pine scent that had always defined our valley, replaced by the artificial fragrance of political theater mixed with the distinctive aroma of corporate environmental messaging that smelled suspiciously like expensive bullshit. Knowledge nugget: document your environmental stewardship practices with professional photography and scientific data. Social media campaigns work both ways when you have evidence of actual conservation success instead of manufactured outrage. The documentary filmmaker following our case released a viral trailer that destroyed Cordelia's narrative within hours. Lake Liberty, when environmental law becomes legal theft, featured stunning footage of our pristine lake contrasted with the chemical-soaked golf course visible across the valley, making environmental hypocrisy impossible to ignore for anyone with functioning brain cells. Social media counter-campaigns organized by property rights advocates made hashtag private conservation and hashtag property rights matter trend as rural communities recognize their own struggles in our environmental harassment story. The nuclear bomb dropped when Peter Chen revealed that Mountain West Communications was actually a subsidiary of the same investment group funding Alpine Vista Estates development. The environmental protection campaign was literally being funded by people whose resort posed actual environmental threats while attacking genuine conservation. That night, standing on my supposedly illegal shoreline while watching stars reflect in water that government regulators claimed was an environmental disaster, despite exceeding federal quality standards, the taste of incoming justice was sweeter than mountain air after summer rain. This wasn't about environmental protection anymore. This was about whether systematic corruption disguised as environmental righteousness could steal American heritage from families who'd earned it through generations of stewardship. Time to find out if truth still mattered when wealthy people thought they owned the narrative. The smoking gun arrived in my mailbox disguised as a misfiled legal document that would make federal prosecutors weep tears of prosecutorial joy and defense. Attorneys consider immediate career changes to occupations requiring less creativity with constitutional law. Peter Chen's investigation had uncovered something that transformed our local property dispute into a federal criminal conspiracy, with implications reaching far beyond one family's mountain lake and into the realm of organized crime masquerading as environmental protection. Hidden in Alpine Vista Estates development documents was a master plan that read like a criminal enterprise manual written by people too arrogant to use code words or too stupid to realize that federal prosecutors love cases with comprehensive written evidence. Phase 3 property acquisition strategy detailed a systematic scheme to force private landowners off properties interfering with luxury resort expansion. My lake wasn't just an obstacle, it was the centerpiece of a planned $50 million resort expansion that would transform our pristine mountain valley into another overcrowded vacation destination for wealthy people seeking authentic mountain experiences without mountains, wildlife, or authenticity. The financial web was uglier than campaign finance reports and twice as corrupt. Alpine Vista Estates was owned by Rocky Mountain Resort Partners, controlled by Heritage Investment Group, funded by Chinese investors seeking American mountain properties for development and resale to wealthy retirees who wanted to live in resort communities that looked like what America used to be before people like them bought and destroyed it. Knowledge nugget: Homestead-era property rights often supersede modern environmental regulations. Original federal land patents create nearly unbreakable ownership claims that require criminal fraud to circumvent. The document trail revealed that our property had been targeted specifically because federal homestead patents from 1889 created water rights that couldn't be regulated, restricted, or seized through normal government channels. The only way to acquire our lake was through fraud, harassment, and manufactured legal crises designed to force a sale. The conspiracy involved forged environmental assessments, fabricated scientific data, and coordinated government pressure campaigns targeting multiple private landowners across 3 states. Every environmental crisis had been manufactured by the same network of consulting firms, PR companies, and political operatives working for the same investment group. The criminal implications were staggering enough to make organized crime families look like amateur shoplifters. Mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, civil rights violations, and RICO charges for operating an ongoing criminal enterprise designed to steal private property through systematic fraud disguised as environmental protection. But the smoking gun was Cordelia's email that made her sound like a Bond villain with an MBA. Hawkins' resistance exceeding projections, lake acquisition value justifies accelerated pressure tactics, environmental regulatory channels proving effective, media manipulation campaign generating desired government intervention. Recommend timeline compression to force sale before federal oversight potential. The smell of criminal desperation was finally overpowering her expensive perfume, and the taste of incoming federal justice was sweeter than mountain spring water on a summer morning. They'd planned my family's destruction like a quarterly business review, complete with timelines, budgets, and success metrics measured in stolen heritage and destroyed lives. The casual nature of their correspondence about ruining families made mob bosses look like humanitarian philanthropists. The environmental fraud was more extensive than a pharmaceutical company's side effects list. Pristine Environmental Consulting was a shell company existing solely to produce false environmental assessments supporting property seizure schemes. Their scientific methodology involved copying template reports with property-specific details inserted wherever they needed to justify government intervention. Political corruption reached the State Environmental Protection Agency, where officials received consulting fees from shell companies connected to the investment group. Environmental regulations were being selectively enforced to pressure targeted landowners while ignoring actual violations by resort developers. My attorney, Harrison Steele, looked at evidence spread across our kitchen table and smiled like a prosecutor who'd discovered video footage of crimes that defense attorneys couldn't explain away with interpretive dance and creative constitutional theories. Fletcher, they documented their own criminal conspiracy better than most federal investigations. We're not just going to win, we're going to destroy their entire operation and send them to federal prison. Time to show these corporate predators what constitutional justice looked like when delivered by Americans who refused to surrender their heritage to wealthy criminals with environmental camouflage and questionable moral compasses. Our kitchen transformed into something that looked like a cross between a federal task force command center and a law school study group. If law school study groups involved taking down organized crime networks and the students carried both bar exam prep materials and concealed weapons permits, Harrison Steele assembled a legal dream team that would make Supreme Court justices jealous and white-collar defense attorneys consider immediate career changes to less stressful occupations like bomb disposal or marriage counseling. Constitutional law specialist Dr. Margaret Wolf joined forces with federal criminal prosecutor Jake Morrison, who'd spent 15 years putting criminals in prison and possessed prosecutorial instincts that made guilty defendants confess during coffee breaks. This is the most comprehensive property rights case I've seen in 20 years, Dr. Wolf explained, spreading federal court precedents across our dining room table like battle plans for constitutional warfare. We're not just fighting for your lake, we're establishing precedent that will protect private property rights when wealthy people try to steal them through environmental fraud. Because apparently some people needed constitutional law explained to them like they were kindergartners with trust funds and authority complexes. The evidence organization was beautiful in its systematic devastation of Cordelia's criminal enterprise. Financial records tracing money flows between investment groups looked like family trees for criminal organizations. Email communications documented conspiracy across state lines. Forged environmental reports came with expert analysis proving scientific fraud so obvious it would make fortune tellers look legitimate. The constant rustle of legal documents mixed with the click of laptop keyboards and the smell of coffee brewing at all hours created a soundtrack and atmosphere of democracy defending itself against systematic corruption through proper legal channels and constitutional protections. Knowledge nuggets for the audience: constitutional protection. Fifth Amendment takings clause requires compensation for regulatory property seizures, document government overreach for federal civil rights claims. Homestead rights. Original federal land patents create property rights superior to most modern regulations and environmental restrictions. Environmental fraud. Private conservation often outperforms government management. Maintain detailed stewardship records to defend against bogus environmental claims. The community coalition building reached levels that would make political organizers weep with envy and campaign managers take detailed notes on grassroots mobilization techniques. Property rights organizations from 12 states contributed legal funding, recognizing that our case had implications for rural landowners facing similar environmental harassment campaigns. The Hill Country Property Rights Alliance coordinated with the Constitutional Defense Fund, Western States Property Coalition, and even environmental groups horrified by the abuse of environmental laws for systematic property theft. Strange political bedfellows united by understanding that constitutional rights meant something more than suggestions for people with sufficient campaign contribution budgets. Jake Morrison's federal criminal investigation was moving with the efficiency of a well-oiled prosecution machine designed to process organized crime cases and make criminals very nervous about their retirement planning options. "We're looking at the largest property fraud conspiracy in Colorado history," Jake explained, his laptop displaying organizational charts that looked like criminal family trees with more branches than most people's genealogy research. "This goes way beyond your lake. We're talking systematic theft of American heritage disguised as environmental protection." The expert witness recruitment was like assembling the Avengers of property rights and environmental science if the Avengers specialized in constitutional law and had advanced degrees in making criminals regret their life choices. Wildlife biologists documenting our superior conservation practices. Constitutional scholars analyzing homestead-era property rights. Forensic accountants tracing criminal money flows with mathematical precision that would make IRS auditors proud. The media strategy coordination was surgical in its precision and devastating in its impact on Cordelia's false narrative. Peter Chen's investigative series was attracting national attention to environmental fraud. Documentary filmmakers were competing for exclusive access to our story. Constitutional law professors were incorporating our case into curricula as a landmark example of government overreach. The financial warfare preparation was comprehensive and designed to bankrupt criminals through their own legal system, which seemed like poetic justice with mathematical precision. We were seeking treble damages under federal RICO statutes, civil rights violations carrying unlimited damage potential, legal fee recovery that would make Cordelia's attorneys financially responsible for prosecuting themselves. Our war room expanded to include allies bringing specialized expertise to constitutional defense. Eleanor Prescott, retired federal judge, provided strategic legal advice about federal court procedures and judicial psychology. Buck Sterling coordinated agricultural community support and political pressure campaigns. Dr. Sarah Whitman documented our lake's ecological importance for federal environmental protection arguments. The counterattack plan was comprehensive and designed to destroy the entire criminal network while establishing constitutional precedent protecting property rights from environmental fraud schemes. Phase 1. Federal criminal referral with evidence that would make prosecutors salivate. Phase 2. Constitutional civil rights lawsuit seeking damages and precedent. Phase 3. Legislative advocacy for stronger property protections. Phase 4. Educational campaign teaching constitutional rights. The taste of incoming constitutional justice was sweeter than mountain spring water, and the sound of legal machinery grinding into motion against systematic corruption was more satisfying than morning coffee after a perfect night's sleep. That evening, sitting on my porch listening to lake water that corrupt officials had temporarily made illegal for me to enjoy, surrounded by evidence that would send criminals to federal prison while protecting constitutional rights for future generations, I felt the unshakable conviction that American law was about to remind wealthy criminals what happens when you try to steal heritage from families willing to fight for constitutional principles. Time to show these corporate predators what constitutional justice looked like when delivered with federal efficiency and generational determination. When federal investigators started asking uncomfortable questions about Heritage Investment Group's business practices, Cordelia shifted from suburban environmental dictator to cornered criminal faster than a pharmaceutical executive changing congressional testimony under oath. Her first move was hiring enough white-collar criminal defense attorneys to staff a small law firm specializing in creative constitutional interpretations for rich people. Marcus Steinberg charged $500 an hour and had the kind of reputation that made federal prosecutors simultaneously nervous and excited about career-defining conviction opportunities. But Cordelia's panic was showing like cheap makeup in summer heat. The Heritage Investment Group offices suffered a convenient electrical fire that destroyed servers, backup systems, and enough criminal evidence to convict a small organized crime syndicate. Insurance investigators raised eyebrows about the timing, but proving arson requires more evidence than suspicious coincidences and desperate criminals with obvious motives. Because apparently some people think delete means permanently destroyed, and federal computer forensics is just a myth perpetuated by people who watch too much television. Mini twist. FBI computer forensics specialists recovered everything from supposedly destroyed servers, plus discovered Cordelia had been secretly recording video conferences with co-conspirators as insurance against betrayal, evidence that would destroy her entire criminal network and provide prosecutors with a highlight reel of criminal stupidity. The evidence destruction was amateur criminality so obvious it belonged in textbooks about what not to do when under federal investigation. Professional forensics experts don't just disappear when you need them. They multiply like federal prosecutors at a corruption convention and get very excited about recovering deleted files from systems that criminals thought were wiped clean. My ranch security became a technological fortress that would make military installations jealous. Motion sensors, trail cameras, perimeter alarms, and enough surveillance equipment to document every criminal act committed by people apparently too stupid to realize they were being recorded while committing crimes on private property. The constant electronic beeps mixed with natural ranch sounds created a modern symphony of property rights defense that my great-grandfather would have found both impressive and completely necessary given the criminal behavior of people claiming environmental concern. The sabotage escalated to environmental terrorism designed to frame me for crimes while committing actual environmental violations. Someone contaminated our pristine lake with industrial chemicals, then photographed the damage as evidence of my environmental destruction. The metallic taste of chemical contamination mixed with rage as we watched criminals destroy the ecosystem they claimed to be protecting. The irony was so thick you could package it and sell it as industrial-strength stupidity to people who specialize in making bad situations infinitely worse through criminal activity. Equipment destruction became weekly vandalism rituals. Solar panels smashed, water pumps sabotaged, trail cameras destroyed by people who apparently didn't realize that destroying surveillance equipment while being recorded by backup surveillance systems was not an effective criminal strategy for avoiding federal prosecution. But Cordelia's desperation reached peak criminal stupidity with the bribery attempt that would make federal prosecutors throw career advancement parties and defense attorneys consider immediate retirement to non-extradition countries. She arrived at our ranch looking like she'd been sleeping in her Escalade for a week. Designer outfit wrinkled, makeup smeared, face displaying genuine terror instead of pharmaceutical executive arrogance. For the first time since this nightmare began, she looked like someone who understood that federal prison was a real possibility rather than just an inconvenient legal obstacle. "Fletcher, this situation has gotten completely out of control," she said, clutching a briefcase with the desperation of someone holding their last hope of avoiding criminal consequences. "Maybe we can reach a mutually beneficial resolution." What Cordelia didn't know was that FBI agent Martinez had already equipped me with recording equipment. Federal agents love watching criminals provide additional evidence of felonies while thinking they're negotiating their way out of existing criminal charges. The recording device was smaller than a smartphone and more sensitive than a teenager's emotional state during relationship drama. Every word, every nervous breath, every incriminating confession was being documented for federal prosecution and Cordelia's eventual sentencing hearing. "I'm prepared to offer $15 million, Cordelia said, opening her briefcase to reveal legal documents that looked like they'd been prepared by attorneys specializing in criminal conspiracy and money laundering. Immediate cash transfer, complete property rights transfer, all legal troubles disappear permanently." The woman was attempting to bribe a federal witness using proceeds from criminal conspiracy while under active FBI investigation, with agents listening in real time through equipment sophisticated enough to detect her accelerating heart rate and criminal desperation. "That's very generous," I replied, playing my role like an actor who understood that one good performance could send organized criminals to federal prison for decades. "But what about all these environmental concerns you've been raising?" "Environmental concerns?" She laughed with the sound of dying criminal enterprises mixed with desperation. "Those are just regulatory tools, Fletcher. Smart people use government regulations to acquire property from people too naive to understand how the system really works." She just confessed to environmental fraud, attempted bribery, and conspiracy to steal private property. On federal recording equipment, while agents building RICO cases probably celebrated another piece of evidence for what was becoming the most well-documented criminal conspiracy in Colorado history. That evening, watching sunset reflect off lake water that federal investigators now understood represented superior environmental stewardship rather than criminal activity, I felt something approaching satisfaction. Justice was coming with federal authority, constitutional protection, and enough criminal evidence to make this case a prosecutor's dream and a defense attorney's nightmare. Federal pressure intensified like a Colorado thunderstorm in July. You could feel the electricity building, smell the ozone of incoming justice, and hear prosecution thunder rolling across the Rocky Mountains toward Heritage Investment Group's criminal empire. Grand jury indictments landed on Cordelia's doorstep like lightning strikes, each carrying federal felony charges that could send her to prison longer than most people's mortgage terms. Wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy, racketeering, environmental crimes, civil rights violations, and my personal favorite, attempting to bribe a federal witness while under active investigation. Because apparently some people graduated from criminal mastermind school with degrees in making everything worse through additional felonies. The asset forfeiture was comprehensive and devastating. Federal agents seized properties, bank accounts, luxury vehicles, and investment portfolios faster than vultures on roadkill. Cordelia's Escalade, Alpine Vista Mansion, even her designer handbag collection became evidence in what prosecutors called career-defining material. Mini twist. Federal wiretaps revealed Cordelia's final desperation. She'd contacted international money laundering services to move criminal proceeds offshore, adding federal banking crimes and potential treason charges to her impressive felony collection. The community mobilization reached fever pitch as word spread through property rights networks across the American West. Our Lake Liberation rally grew from local support to national constitutional demonstration faster than wildfire in drought season. 500 supporters gathered at our property, creating an atmosphere electric with civic engagement that makes corrupt politicians nervous and constitutional lawyers proud. The sound of pickup trucks arriving from 6 states mixed with righteous conversation, while the smell of barbecue smoke from families who'd driven hours to witness justice created a festival atmosphere of constitutional celebration. National television crews transformed our quiet valley into something resembling a presidential rally. Satellite trucks lined our road, generators hummed constantly, and reporters practiced opening lines that would carry our property rights story across America. My son stood beside me on the makeshift stage, 17 years old and proud as his great-great-grandfather would have been, watching federal justice defend the land that 4 generations of our family had protected through honest stewardship and constitutional principles. "Dad, did we really do all this?" he asked, gesturing at the crowd, media circus, and federal law enforcement presence. "No, son, we just refused to let criminals steal our heritage. Everything else was just good people standing up for constitutional rights." Cordelia's final public appearance was a masterclass in criminal self-destruction that law schools would study for decades. Against her attorney's desperate advice, she showed up with a megaphone and enough manufactured outrage to power a small city. "This is environmental terrorism," she screamed to federal agents, news cameras, and 500 witnesses who'd gathered specifically to watch her downfall. "Private property owners are destroying public resources for selfish recreational abuse." And the irony was so thick you could serve it at constitutional law conferences as an example of defendants providing evidence for their own prosecution. Federal marshals maintained professional order, but you could see amusement as they watched someone dig their legal grave deeper with every word, while television cameras documented everything for posterity and prosecutorial evidence. The political bombshell dropped when FBI agents arrested County Commissioner Bradley Morrison during live coverage. The sight of an elected official led away in handcuffs sent shockwaves through the crowd and probably through every corrupt politician within 100 miles, who suddenly remembered urgent business elsewhere. 2 more commissioners resigned within hours. The county planning board dissolved overnight. Bank officials started cooperation agreements with federal prosecutors faster than teenagers confessing when caught red-handed. But the most satisfying moment came when federal agents approached Cordelia mid-rant with enough backup to handle a small invasion or one desperate criminal with international money laundering connections. Ma'am, you're under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, environmental fraud, civil rights violations, and international money laundering, Agent Martinez announced with professional satisfaction that makes 20-year careers worthwhile. You have the right to remain silent, which would have been excellent advice 6 months ago. The sound of handcuffs clicking while 500 witnesses erupted in cheers was sweeter than Sunday church bells announcing constitutional justice in our mountain valley. The constitutional impact was immediate and far-reaching. Legal precedent protecting private property rights from environmental fraud, federal policy changes preventing regulatory abuse, legislative interest in strengthening constitutional protections against government overreach disguised as environmental concern. The taste of victory was sweeter than mountain spring water, and the sight of our pristine lake reflecting morning sun while federal agents processed criminals who'd tried to steal our heritage made every legal bill, sleepless night, and moment of uncertainty worthwhile. Standing on shoreline that corrupt officials had temporarily made illegal for me to enjoy, surrounded by evidence that would send criminals to federal prison while establishing constitutional precedent protecting property rights for future generations, I felt the unshakable conviction that constitutional justice still meant something in America. Some battles are worth fighting, especially when criminals underestimate American determination, constitutional principles, and federal law enforcement with unlimited prosecution resources and a well-developed sense of ironic justice. The hunter had become the hunted, and these corporate predators were about to discover what constitutional accountability looked like when delivered with federal efficiency and mountain justice. Our family's pristine mountain lake had never hosted anything like it. 500 people packed the natural amphitheater formed by Rocky Mountain slopes, creating the most righteous gathering our valley had seen since my great-grandfather's homestead celebration in 1889. Media trucks lined our private road like a technological parade of constitutional journalism. Satellite dishes pointed skyward, generators hummed constantly, and the smell of pine needles mixed with barbecue smoke and the distinctive aroma of righteous anger that comes from people watching wealthy criminals try to steal American heritage through environmental fraud. I stood at the makeshift podium looking out at faces representing the backbone of American property rights: weathered ranchers, constitutional lawyers who'd driven from Denver, environmental scientists holding signs supporting private conservation, and families who'd brought picnic lunches to witness democracy defending itself against systematic corruption. 6 months ago, I began my voice carrying across the crowd and through live television feeds. My family thought our biggest challenge was maintaining a century of environmental stewardship on land that's been ours since before Colorado was a state. We had no idea that wealthy criminals were planning to steal our heritage through environmental fraud disguised as government regulation. The crowd murmured like angry bees as I displayed evidence that federal investigators had compiled into charges that would send organized criminals to prison for decades. Forged documents, fabricated scientific reports, financial records revealing systematic theft disguised as conservation concern. My son stood beside me, 17 years old and proud as his great-great-grandfather would have been, watching federal justice defend land that 4 generations of our family had protected through honest stewardship and constitutional principles. Because apparently some people needed to learn the hard way that American heritage isn't for sale, regardless of how much money you throw at corrupt government officials. The real drama started when a white Escalade pushed through media barricades like a bad movie sequel that nobody wanted but everyone was going to watch anyway. Cordelia emerged wearing oversized sunglasses and the kind of desperate expression that suggested either complete detachment from reality or spectacular criminal stupidity in front of 500 witnesses. Her attorney, Marcus Steinberg, followed with the resigned expression of someone watching a client commit professional suicide in high definition while billing $1,500 an hour to witness criminal self-destruction. "This is environmental terrorism." Cordelia's voice cut through the crowd like fingernails on chalkboards, mixed with the death rattle of dying criminal enterprises. Private property owners are destroying public resources while corrupt federal agents persecute legitimate environmental protection efforts. The crowd's response was immediate and deafening. 500 voices raised in unified disagreement created a wall of sound that probably registered on seismic equipment in neighboring states. A rancher in the front row shouted, "Lady, you're the one who poisoned his lake." An environmental scientist added, "Real conservationists don't commit fraud." Children pointed and whispered, "Is that the bad lady Daddy told us about?" The mic drop moment came when FBI agent Martinez stepped forward with federal arrest warrants and enough backup agents to handle a small invasion or one very desperate criminal with international money laundering connections. "Ms. Blackstone," Agent Martinez announced, her voice carrying federal authority and prosecutorial satisfaction, "you're under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, environmental crimes, civil rights violations, and international money laundering. When wealthy people try to steal family heritage through systematic fraud disguised as environmental protection, they've picked the wrong fight with the wrong constitution in the wrong damn country." The crowd erupted like a football stadium during constitutional overtime. Cameras flashed as federal agents placed handcuffs on a woman who thought money made her untouchable by consequences, accountability, or basic criminal law. But the real vindication came when County Commissioner Bradley Morrison was simultaneously arrested during live television coverage. The sight of an elected official led away in handcuffs sent shockwaves through the political establishment and probably caused emergency document shredding sessions in corrupt offices across multiple counties. Judge Eleanor Prescott took the podium with 40 years of constitutional authority behind her voice. "Today marks the end of environmental fraud as a tool for stealing American heritage. Federal prosecutors have dismantled a criminal organization that threatened private property rights and environmental stewardship across the American West. The constitutional impact was immediate and comprehensive. Complete vindication of our property rights, federal protection preventing future environmental harassment. Millions in civil damages for systematic rights violations. Legal precedent protecting private conservation from government overreach disguised as environmental concern. The taste of victory was sweeter than mountain spring water, and the sound of handcuffs closing on criminals who tried to steal our heritage was more satisfying than morning coffee after a perfect night's sleep. Standing on shoreline that corrupt officials had temporarily made illegal for me to enjoy, watching federal agents process criminals while 500 supporters celebrated constitutional justice, I felt the unshakable conviction that sometimes ordinary American families can still defeat systematic corruption when they refuse to surrender their heritage. Justice in the Rocky Mountains hits harder than federal law enforcement with unlimited prosecution resources, and tastes sweeter than freedom defended through constitutional principles that still mean something when good people stand together against wealthy criminals who forgot that some things aren't for sale. 2 years later, I'm sitting on the same dock my grandfather built in 1952, watching sunrise paint our family lake in shades of gold and constitutional vindication, sipping coffee from a mug that reads Federal Witness of the Year, while reading morning papers with the satisfaction that only comes from watching criminals get exactly what they deserve. The headline still makes me grin like a kid finding candy money in old coat pockets. Environmental fraud ringleader sentenced to 12 years federal prison, ordered to pay $18.5 million restitution. Cordelia Blackstone was currently enjoying federal hospitality at FCI Englewood, where her accommodations probably had better Wi-Fi than most rural areas but significantly fewer opportunities for environmental fraud, property theft, or terrorizing honest families through manufactured legal crises. 12 years in federal prison, plus restitution payments that would keep her financially devastated until Social Security kicked in. The woman who'd tried to steal our century-old lake was now making license plates and learning that orange jumpsuits don't come in designer cuts or pharmaceutical executive sizes. Because karma, it turns out, has federal enforcement authority and an excellent sense of ironic justice. The criminal sentences read like a prosecutor's holiday wish list. Heritage Investment Group executives received 8 to 15 years each for racketeering. County Commissioner Morrison got 6 years for conspiracy and civil rights violations. Even environmental consultants who'd fabricated scientific reports received federal time, proving that scientific fraud costs extra when prosecutors have unlimited resources and detailed documentation. The civil damages were comprehensive and financially devastating to our former enemies. Our family received $3.2 million for harassment, property destruction, and constitutional rights violations, enough to modernize our conservation programs and establish permanent legal protections against future government overreach. But the real victory was what we'd built from the ashes of their criminal conspiracy. The Fletcher Hawkins Constitutional Conservation Institute occupied our restored family barn, where the scent of pine wood mixed with the sound of children learning about environmental stewardship and constitutional rights. The texture of old barn boards worn smooth by generations of honest work now supported educational displays teaching how private conservation outperforms government management when property owners have constitutional protections. Knowledge nugget: constitutional property rights and environmental stewardship work together. Document your conservation practices to establish both legal protection and ecological credibility against fraudulent government harassment. My son graduated valedictorian and earned full scholarship to Colorado School of Mines for constitutional law and environmental engineering. His senior project on environmental fraud schemes had been published in Harvard Environmental Law Review and was being used by law schools nationwide as a case study in property rights protection. The Constitutional Conservation Alliance had grown into a national organization protecting 87 family operations, saving over 200,000 acres from fraudulent seizure, and creating legal precedents shielding constitutional property rights for generations. Sometimes good ideas multiply faster than government regulations when people understand what's at stake. Dr. Margaret Wolf had become more than our scientific expert. She'd become family. Romance wasn't something I'd expected at 54, but shared battles against systematic corruption create bonds stronger than professional relationships. Our partnership combined constitutional law expertise with environmental stewardship knowledge for educational programs that actually worked. The Supreme Court accepted our case for national constitutional precedent, strengthening private property protections and establishing environmental stewardship as a fundamental property right that government agencies couldn't regulate away through manufactured crises or fraudulent assessments. Our annual Rocky Mountain Constitutional Conservation Festival draws 5,000 visitors celebrating the intersection of property rights, environmental stewardship, and constitutional principles. The same courthouse steps where federal agents arrested corrupt officials now host educational seminars about constitutional law and private conservation. The taste of morning coffee mixed with mountain air and constitutional freedom reminded me daily why this fight had been worth every legal bill, sleepless night, and moment of uncertainty about whether justice still meant something in America. The Fletcher Hawkins Environmental Stewardship Scholarship funds rural students studying constitutional law and environmental science. The Constitutional Conservation Research Center partners with universities documenting how private stewardship outperforms government management when property owners have constitutional protections against regulatory harassment. Next year's challenge involves energy companies seeking pipeline easements through private conservation areas, but that's another constitutional battle for families who understand that some fights are worth having when you're protecting American principles. The sound of lake water lapping against shoreline that corrupt officials had temporarily made illegal for me to enjoy, mixed with children's laughter from educational programs and the distant call of wildlife thriving under private stewardship, created a symphony of constitutional conservation that 4 generations of my family would recognize as the sound of American freedom defended. Drop a comment with your own property rights nightmare. Let's keep defending constitutional freedoms together. And if you want to see more victories against government overreach and corporate corruption, hit that subscribe button. Because constitutional justice still means something in America when ordinary families refuse to surrender their heritage to systematic corruption disguised as environmental righteousness.